My heart weeps. And I wish I could tell you that it's the first time my heart has wept for a child who died from a medication error, but it's not. In fact, about to join me on the panel today is Chris Jerry, who is the father of Emily Jerry, just about the most darling little girl you ever did see, who died from a medication error in my hospital about 11 years ago. And I wish it were the last time I wept for a child who died from a medication error. And you know what? It could be. I actually have hope. It depends on whether we can collectively get our acts together to do what we now know from the evidence that we have worked painstakingly to amass works to prevent errors like this from taking another child's life. And there are many reasons to have hope. To its credit, my hospital, Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, rallied after the death of Emily Jerry, and together with other children's hospitals from across Ohio, formed the Children's Hospital's Solutions for Patient Safety that has now, with the financial support of the Partnership for Patients, grown to a network of 125 children's hospitals across the United States and Canada, with a mission to eliminate serious harm that happens to hospitalized children. In the 4 years since its inception as a national network, these hospitals have saved over 7,000 children from serious harm and avoided an estimated $130 million in healthcare costs. With our all teach, all learn model and our commitment not to compete on safety, we have decreased the rates of every hospital-acquired harm we have tackled, including pediatric adverse drug events. In fact, pioneering hospitals in our network have reduced pediatric medication errors that cause harm or death by 72%. Thank you. So how did they do it? They implemented a bundle or collection of best practices from the evidence that is now available to reduce harm. And it's actually not a coincidence that that bundle aligns very well with the actionable patient safety solution that has been created for this summit. I hope that you'll take the time to read through that very well thought out document. The executive summary checklist describes the development of an effective program in eliminating medical errors for children that includes leadership, hardware, software, and most importantly, people. Tasks like authorizing and empowering a multidisciplinary team of smart and passionate people focused on this problem. Instituting software and processes to detect and analyze events and near misses. Deploying a closed-loop communication systems, standardized order sets, enhanced pharmacy services, and paying particular attention to medication safety during the handoff of care between providers and teams. Using smart drug infusion pumps with libraries and alerts that are set for children. Looking inside and outside your hospitals for best practices and opportunities for collaboration. I have no doubt that if all hospitals who care for children urgently and efficiently implement this checklist, we will be well on our way to protecting children like Josh and Emily from harm. And now I would like to welcome an all-star panel of experts in the area of pediatric adverse drug events to the stage, some of whom have spent their entire professional lives perseverating and problem-solving in the area of pediatric medication errors. Many of us have actually worked together in the past, and the Patient Safety Movement Foundation has brought us together, and I know you will enjoy hearing from them. So please join me. Thank you. So I want to introduce this crew of esteemed colleagues, but before I do, I want to recognize Dr. Nat Sims, who is not sitting here. So Nat contributed heavily to the Actionable Patient Safety Solution, or APS document, and was supposed to actually be the moderator of this session. And then he was supposed to be a panelist on this session, and he ceded both of those roles because he wanted us to have the opportunity to participate, which is extremely gracious of him, I'm sure you'd agree, and humbles all of us. So I don't know where he is, but thank you, Nat. Okay, he's still here? All right, yay!
Stand up.
Okay.
Stand up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So let me introduce this group for you, and then I have some questions for them. And of course, hopefully by now you've all figured out your access to the app, and we'll ask some questions as well. I know this group is looking forward to what you're thinking, and hopefully you'll take advantage of the opportunity to hear what they have to say to answer your questions. So on the far left is Chris Jerry. Chris is the founder and CEO of the Emily Jerry Foundation. Since Emily's tragic death, he's been working on being an active part of the solution, advocating for and learning from expert clinicians and finding ways to reduce medical errors. Chris believes in the smart implementation and adoption of technology as clinical tools to decrease errors, while appreciating the need to couple technology with evolving best practices. Next to Chris is Sun Yang, also known affectionately as Coco. Coco is an assistant professor of pharmacy practice at Chapman University School of Pharmacy. She holds a PhD in pharmacology and is board-certified pediatric pharmacy specialist, actively practicing in pediatric pharmacy at Children's Hospital of Orange County. As a clinical pharmacist, Dr. Yang is interested in the studies of pediatric medication safety and clinical outcomes of medication treatment in children. She's also the recipient of a Mentored Clinical Scientist Research Career Development Award from the National Cancer Institute for her translational study on human melanoma. Next to her is Deborah Pasko. Deb is the Director of Medication Safety and Quality at the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. She has been a pediatric pharmacist for 17 years and has experience in bedside care, research, teaching, hospital administration, leadership, and is a lean coach. She leads several national projects and works closely with the FDA, the CDC, HHS, and other national organizations. And lastly is Jim Broselow. Jim is one of the pioneers of the patient safety movement. He is an ISMP Lifetime Achievement Award winner who in the 1980s, with the introduction of the Broselow tape and color-coded crash carts, demonstrated that pediatric emergencies could be handled effectively by EMS and community hospital providers. He has continued to innovate with a focus on pediatric emergency care that accesses outside of children's hospitals. He's a board-certified family practitioner and also in emergency medicine, and is presently the founder and CMO of Broselow. So, as you can tell, this is a really fantastic panel. So let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Coco. You're an academic who has really immersed herself in the science of pharmacy and medication errors. And I wonder from your vantage point if you could talk about some of the unique challenges that we have to prevent pediatric adverse drug events in children.
Thank you. So actually, actually preventing medication errors in pediatric patients does pose some unique challenges. Children are particularly vulnerable to adverse outcomes from medication errors because of the need for weight-based drug dosing involving multiple calculations, the need for dilutions of stock drug solutions to compound specific pediatric dose, and also because of the children's immature renal and hepatic functions, as well as their limited communication skill when experiencing side effect. The drug therapy in neonate is even more complicated due to the fact of their small size, very limited drug information in neonates, and the age-specific variabilities in the drug metabolism and the drug response. Especially in a study which showed that a large portion of the medications have been used in pediatrics, have not been studied in age-specific populations to assess patient safety and medication efficacy. So such a high rate of label use also raises the risk of causing medication adverse events in pediatric patients.
Great. So besides being a board-certified pediatric pharmacy, you're also a clinical pharmacy specialist. So can you talk a little bit about that role in the hospital and particularly with a lens toward preventing medical errors?
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, as a pharmacist, I'm very happy that pharmacist has been recognized as one of the key players in improving medication safety. Particularly in pediatric population, the pediatric pharmaceutical care requires a highly individualized approach to medication therapy. Each dose of the medication that we give to our patients is all customized or personalized based on patient's age and patient's body weight. So the clinical pharmacist, especially pediatric pharmacist, has been specially trained and equipped with expert knowledge and clinical skills necessary to ensure safe and effective drug use and to optimize the drug treatment outcome in pediatric patients. So especially in recent years, many progress has been achieved in reducing medication errors has been fueled by the contribution of clinical pharmacists. As we proposed in our action plan, pediatric pharmacists can collaborate with IT team and physicians to develop and customize medication order set to help standardize medication therapy. And clinical pharmacists can also participate in runs, especially in the high acuity settings or any area where children receive health care. As a clinical pharmacist, we can also help to implement a pharmacy-driven adverse drug event reporting system, embracing nurses and physicians to report all those ADEs in a timely and accurate way. Besides those, on a daily basis, pharmacists verify and monitor all medication orders for pediatric patients and also conduct independent second check prior to dispensing the high-risk medications. And also we supervise our pharmacy technicians to ensure correct and safe drug compounding and dispensing.
You know, you made me think of something when you were talking. One of the riskiest times in healthcare for the patient is when there are transitions in care. So when, because I'm a pediatrician, I think in terms of children, but we move a child either from the emergency room to the acute care floor or to the ICU or back, so we move the patient, or even more commonly, the healthcare providers change and there's a transition. And with medication errors in particular, we know that 2/3 of those occur during those transitions of care. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how pharmacy specialists can have an impact at this very high-risk time for patients.
Yes, in recent years, the important role that pharmacists play in the transitions of care has been increasingly recognized. Many pharmacists directed interventional approaches has been proven effective to reduce pediatric adverse events during the transition of care, especially upon patient's admission and discharge. For example, the implement of a pharmacy-managed admission, medication history, or medication reconciliation process has been shown to effectively prevent potentially significant adverse drug reactions. At Children's Hospital of Orange County, where I'm practicing, so the pharmacy department has successfully implemented a program called Meds to Bed. So pharmacists bring the discharge medications to our patients at bedside and provide medication counseling before the patients discharge from hospital. This has been shown to have a positive impact on medication safety and the patient's care, improving the patient's access to necessary medications right after discharge, and also increasing their understanding of the medication and how to use them safely. Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great. I'm going to stop picking on you.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to you, Chris. So I just have to say that, as I explained in my opening remarks, Chris and I have a relationship that has now gone back over a decade, and I think people like Chris just drop right out of heaven, because when I put myself in the shoes of the parents on that video or Chris's shoes, you don't want any part of what you'll see when that happens. But I just so admire the way that you have kind of emerged from this tragedy and really have made yourself a champion for other people's children in the future. And so I know that you have spent more time than anybody else thinking about the experience that you had with Emily, and also learning and educating yourself about the world of medication errors. And I wonder what thoughts that you have that you would share about what could have been done or what should be done to prevent an error like that from ever happening again.
Yes. There are a number of things, but first I'd like to say that I have the utmost respect for Ann's facility in Cleveland and how they responded, and how they've worked with the Emily Jerry Foundation and with me to bring things forward in such a positive way to help honor Emily in her short life and make sure, absolutely certain that these types of errors don't keep happening over and over again. Mm-hmm. So now with respect to your question, what have I found would have prevented Emily's error? Right after root cause analysis had determined that a pharmacy technician had made a horrible compounding error. Instead of using a standard off-the-shelf bag of saline with 0.9% sodium chloride concentration, this pharmacy technician thought she was doing the right thing. She had utilized a empty compounding bag and subsequently had seen 3 vials of what's called hypertonic saline, which has a 23.4% concentration of sodium chloride. And she filled the bag with that hypertonic saline, which is never meant to be used as a base solution for any medication in its purest form without a diluent being added. And then she added the chemotherapy agent, and it was sent up to Emily's floor. After root cause analysis had pulled together all of these details, my mind began thinking about the process. And, how could this have happened? And I've always been involved in the technology realm, and I have a big inner geek. I love technology. It's just the way my mind works. And I started thinking to myself, how could this pharmacy technician have made such a horrible error? What type of technology might have been implemented that could have prevented this from happening? Because my concern after Emily's passing was I wanted to make absolutely certain that the same type of error doesn't happen to other babies and children, other patients. And not having the knowledge that I have today about pharmacy workflow and clinical workflow and things like that, immediately I started thinking in 2006, in our grocery stores, we have barcoding. And it's so accurate that grocery store chains could track tens of thousands of items very accurately, so much so that they can trust us all with self-checkout. They're that accurate. So I was thinking to myself, you know, this technology, the cost of it overall had to have come down significantly. And then my mind started to think to myself, well, wait a minute, had there been just basic barcode technology implemented at the facility when this happened, I think that had this young pharmacy technician scanned the first bottle of hypertonic saline and definitely the second bottle of hypertonic saline, all kinds of bells and whistles would have gone off, and her supervising pharmacist might have very well recognized that, hey, you know, bottom line is, I think if had simple barcode technology been implemented, I believe my daughter Emily would still be with us today.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Jim, I want to move to you. You've really used your powers of innovation and ingenuity to make children safer from medication errors with the development of the color-coded crash carts and Broselow tape. And I wonder if it might be interesting to the audience to learn a little bit about those and how you came to do those and the impact that they have.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be able to do that. I heard about how Joe did it, and I want to make him seem really high-tech compared to how I did it.
Okay.
So I was a family doctor. I moved to Hickory, North Carolina. I started moonlighting in the ER, and I became an ER doctor. And I found that I was smart enough to pick a tiny hospital, Lincoln County Hospital, and sat in my little room there, worked 48-hour shifts, and I learned how to treat adults. Not only could I treat them, but everybody in the ER could treat them. You know, nothing personal, but if one of you came with a heart attack, you couldn't tell by the look on our face or whatever. But in the 1980s, if we got a call a kid was coming in, it was pandemonium. Mm-hmm. It was like crazy. And everybody was nervous, and I was nervous, and the nurses were nervous. And I had this idea, and I would like to say that I had this idea because I'm altruistic. It had nothing to do with this. I just couldn't do it. I was so anxious when these kids came in, I didn't feel like I could perform. So I wanted a little tool. So I had the idea that wouldn't it be nice if you had a tape measure like a carpenter's tape measure. And from a business point of view, I did a smart thing. I patented it. How can you patent a tape measure? It doesn't measure length, it measured dose. And later, it measured equipment. And the most obvious things with kids are they're different sizes, but nobody had ever used how long they were to develop a system. So I felt intuitively that length should predict weight and equipment. We did a bunch of studies, and we were able to show that it predicted it. So once we did that, the way we did the studies was just to tell you, I was not academic, I was family doc. And so I had Nelson's textbook, and it had a height-weight table in the back. I wanted to turn it into even kilograms. I had no clue how to do that, but my neighbor was my CPA. I gave him Nelson's book, and he made the intervals. So now I had the intervals. I asked 3 family pediatricians, would they measure kids and give me the number off the tape? So they did that. But I had no clue how to do the math. But we had Lenore Ryan was our community college, so we took them, and they took it on for their statistics course, and they called me up and said, hey, this works pretty well. So that was my academic study. So anyway, why do you know about this? Because I got a throwaway journal from Leon, and Leon Comides was talking about this thing called PALS, which I had never heard of. So I called him up, and I said I did this study in North Carolina, and he said, well, do you want to come up and talk to my committee? So all these academicians were there. I was a nervous wreck. Now, I had the patent, I had the concept, but I didn't have a tape. But I live in the country, and my neighbor made saddles. So I had him cut out a swath of saddle. I sat there on the kitchen table with my wife. She made the little line. She drove in the dose of epinephrine. And that's what I presented to the PALS committee, my tape, my belt, whatever. And so it took off. And,
Wow, that's
yeah, and what I learned was it wasn't just me that had this problem.
yeah.
It was everybody. It was a universal problem. Fast forward a couple of years, I had forgotten about this, was thinking about last night, this is an international group. I had a copy of a newspaper from England, from London, about one of those early tragedies when children were shot in Dunblane, Scotland. And the doc who went there had a color-coded bag on their lap and took it there. So it really had huge implications. And the other thing I can say is, somebody asked me the other day is, you know, why did you invent, or how did you invent the Broselow tape? And I stopped and thought, no, the Broselow tape invented me. Mm-hmm. And so it's taken on a life of its own.
So you've been working on this for a while, and I wonder, I would find it very valuable to know what your perspective is on the root causes of medication errors
In children.
in children.
Well, that's kind of a no-brainer. It's math, right? Everything is math-based. So humans just can't do math that reliably. Mm-hmm. So you're doing it all the time. So I feel like the necessity to do math is one. And the other is, I just feel like medications have become so complex that humans can't keep up with it. We used to be able to, but we can't. So the other thing is, people need information, cliff notes in seconds that tell them exactly what they want and nothing else. So that's kind of the two things that I think are the root cause.
So what do we need to do to address those issues?
Well, we started working. I mean, what I had learned out of this was two things. One is that it was possible to standardize one small part of medicine, proof of concept. And number two, the other thing I learned I think is really interesting is that innovation needs to also come from the community hospital. Boston Children's Hospital would never have seen the name for a Broselow tape. Why do you need one? You got two pharmacists there. You see what I mean? You don't need it. So the point is, people that work in the community need to see the needs in the community. The innovation can be simple, but once you recognize the need, then it takes on a life of its own.
So what do you see, Jim, as the future technology advances for medication safety in children?
Well, there's a couple things. Our company has gotten interested in the lowly barcode and tying information to the barcode. We put the information in a database. Instead of books and electronic books, we put the information in a database so we could generate exactly what you want in real time. So that seemed like the missing link to get rid of doing math. The other innovation I'm interested in is, I feel like we've built half of a system. We have the ability to standardize with barcoding, eliminating math, and giving concise information, how to control that part. What is missing is you guys. You all have individual environments, right? Your age, your weight, your renal, your liver, your genomics. This needs to be digital. You need to come into an ER and have your code in your pocket and scan it into a digital system, and everything would be written for you, your needs, your genomics, and take that into account. So I think putting things in a digital system sets us up for the future of what we need as an infrastructure to be able to move forward.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I was thinking that we have benefited so greatly from, as I said, innovators like Joe and you. And then we have people like Deb, who sits in an executive role, and we keep using this term standardization, so can take their good ideas and try to make them standardized across the healthcare delivery system, and in this case, the pediatric medication safety or medication delivery system. And I wonder, Deb, what you think, or how you think standardization is an effective approach in doing that.
So thank you, and thank you for being here today. standardization, and one of the reasons I typically don't have someone introduce me and say that I'm a lean coach. One, I do believe in lean and I do teach that, but two, sometimes it has a strong reaction from people and they say, oh my gosh, she's gonna start talking about lean, and their eyes start to roll back. So I promise I'm not going to do that. But if we think about just for a minute, so Joe, yesterday you talked about the Toyota way and how we started to think about how we build quality. The reason they started to build quality is because they were doing things the same way every time, and they learned what the best practice was. And they learned, if I do it this way every single time, I'm then going to have the best product that comes out of the end of my line. It's also about being able to stop the line. So if you see something going wrong with the process, you understand what that is. Part of my job here today, talking to all of you, and I'm going to talk to you about a project in a few seconds, is I am stopping the line today, because enough is enough with thinking that we need to customize all these bits and pieces. We need to start coming together. And customization is good, but sometimes we can overdo it. So if we even think about Henry Ford, when Henry Ford started building his cars, of how his approach was, and think today about an aircraft carrier. If any of you have been on an aircraft carrier, seen how they work like clockwork. They don't miss a beat. And how can they do that? These are 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are essentially running these aircraft carriers. They do it because they have standard work, they have policies and procedures, and they're doing it the same way every time. So that pilot, when he takes off, or he or she takes off and they land, that is their life. All of us in this room, we are not pilots, but we are healthcare practitioners. It is those patients, that is the life that we need to focus on. So standardization, and a part of this, is bringing the people together with the process.
So can you explain to everyone why it is that hospitals use different concentrations of IV and liquid medications for children?
It's a very interesting question. Why do you use different concentrations? So I think there's a couple different reasons. One of them has been, we've really never had a concerted effort around this, and you've all just done the best that you could and tried to figure it out. And you've done a pretty good job of it, I must say. But in 2017, as we now have transitions of care, I've heard that, transitions of care, compounding, high reliability, high risk, these are all things, for executives sitting in the room, if you didn't know at your hospitals, IV medications and IV compounding and compounding in general is one of the riskiest things that you're doing at your institution. It ranks up there with what you're doing in your operating suites. Because if you make a mistake compounding an IV medication, and as we've heard and we saw, it literally can take a life in seconds. And we have to come together about finding the safest way to do that. So the project that I'm leading, the Standardize for Safety, and by the way, I selfishly put it on the activity feed this morning, so it is there for you. But this is really the first interprofessional effort that looks at standardizing medication concentrations for IV medications and oral liquid medications. The reason that we've done a lot of things that we've done is just because that's all that we knew, in addition to how many times have you heard, that's because the way we've always done it. And Nat, I'm gonna pick on you for just a second, of the anesthesiologist who's been in practice for 25 years, and when you ask him how he compounds a rocuronium drip in the operating room, he can tell you, but he does it very quickly, but guess what? He has 25, 30 years of experience. What about that resident or that fellow that is coming into the operating room that day? What about that fellow that is going to treat one of our pediatric patients? Do they know? Are they going to be doing math? Do they make a different concentration that now, as Ann said, you transition, you go from the operating room to the intensive care unit? Okay, well the ICU now uses a different concentration of rocuronium than what the OR uses. So what happens? We take that infusion down, the nurse takes everything down, the pharmacy compounds something new, a different concentration, that then goes to the bedside, you hook up all the tubing, and then you start to administer, and we have to program the pump all over again. And then what if, so Rocuronium was probably a bad example because we don't use that out of the ICU, but what if it was a medication that you would then continue outside of the ICU and you go to a general care unit? What if that general care unit uses a different concentration of that drug than what the OR and the ICU used? What's the process? We go through it all over again. We're compounding again. Every time that we compound or we touch a pump, we have the chance for error. Nurses in the room, think about how many times a day you touch a pump and do something different. We're almost setting you up for failure. We cannot do that. We cannot do that anymore. We have got to come back and make sure that our technologies, our process, now enhance what our bedside clinicians are doing.
So we have a number of questions, and please keep them coming, but I think that the first one on my list anyway, that might kind of be a good segue from that. It's from Kelly Smith, and she says, if we could commit to do one thing to better engage, actually, it's not the question I thought it was. If we could do one thing to move us closer to the world that you imagine for standardization, what would it be? And then I'll get to Kelly's question.
Okay? Bear with me. I would ask everyone in the room to stand up. I know this is a tight room, but again, bear with me. Everyone, you're going to take 2 steps to the right. Okay? Everyone, you're going to take 2 steps to the left. What did I just do? I talked to you about standardized for safety, and back to Kelly's question, what do I need to do? What can we do? I just talked the talk, and you just walked the walk. This project is opportunity to do the right thing for the patient, and it is knocking at your door. You are now the champions. When you leave here, every single one of you in this room has the mentality to do the right thing for the patient. And Kelly, if it's simply going back to your organization and saying, what concentrations do we use? How do those match the new standards that are coming out? And how do we move it forward at my institution? That is what you do. Thank you.
Okay, so Kelly, thank you. You really got us going there. And actually, Kelly had a slightly different question, which I also want to address, and she didn't realize that she could make multiple points. But she asked if we could commit to do one thing to better engage parents and family members in the detection and reporting of pediatric safety events. What would you all recommend that should be? Maybe I'll start with you, Chris, and then if you others have.
The recommendation is really to continue to strive. I know the word transparency tends to get overused in the work that we all do. To me, transparency is truth. It's about truth. Anne's facility was so transparent with us as parents, delivering the hard news and keeping us apprised of what actually happened. And that is so important. Transparency to me is honesty. And I would encourage all of you, as you engage with parents and with caregivers, to continue to be always striving for transparency. I can handle the truth much better than I can people tap dancing around what's really going on. So.
Okay, there's many good questions in here, so I'll pick another one from Anna Marie Saarinen. How do the panelists feel about last year's American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations regarding curbing the use of pain medications for pediatric patients? Is there such a thing as over-standardization? That's a good question.
Everyone's looking at me, so I'm going to take the question. So there's 2 things here. And actually, in my role at ASHP right now, opioids and everything opioids is also one of my projects. So, I think the recommendations, it comes back to balance for patients of when they have pain, of knowing how to adequately treat that pain, but not over treating the pain. We're all sensitized right now to, essentially don't prescribe opioids. Well, that's not, if your patient needs opioids and has an indication, then you should. But are you doing it in the smart way? Are you using protocols? Are you using, treatment plans that kind of ramp up to that? I think there actually is a point of too much standardization might not be a good thing. Because as all of us sitting up here, deal with pediatric patients, we know that sometimes they just don't always fit in the nice little box that we want them to. And there will always be a need at some point to customize for a pediatric patient. And that patient's always first. So again, it comes back to that balance of, standardization, safety, et cetera. However, we always have to listen to the patient, and we always actually have to listen to the parent. So back to that transparency of, I was personally involved and dealing with a compounding error. I was not the person who made the actual error, but I was 1 degree of separation. I was the ICU pharmacist that then had to take care of that 5-year-old little boy that came to my ICU because we overdosed him on baclofen. And guess what? It was not only the first time, but it was the second time that we screwed up his baclofen dose. And it was because we had a difference in compounding, what he received at his pharmacy. So it's back to parents, caregivers. We have to partner with you. We have to educate, but we have to listen to you. When you say to me, oh, they took 1 ml at home, I need to find out more information. 1 ml doesn't tell me the dose. I need to listen. I need to partner with them. And you need to ask me questions. Don't just take face value of, we know everything, because we don't. It's a partnership.
I think to speak more to your point, Deb, I agree with you completely. But I think what we're really talking about here today is the real importance of patient engagement, not only in our own healthcare, but in our children's healthcare and other family members and what have you, including engaging your patients in their care. As we're talking about today with respect to pediatric patients, who knows their babies and children and their indications better than we as parents do? Who knows their pain levels better than a mother or a father? So on and so forth. And so I would encourage all of the clinicians that are with us today to really, if you're not already, which I'm sure you already are, patient engagement is a very, very hot topic right now, as it should be. Always strive and focus on, are you really listening to those parents and to those caregivers of those children for those intricate clues that you need to come up with the appropriate treatment plan?
Great point. Okay, Anna Marie had one other comment I wanted to share that I thought was important. Can't forget how many adverse events happen after discharge or in the transition to discharge. And it gives an example that she went home with 9 medications around the clock for a newborn. So, it really can be, and she wrote scary, exclamation point, which I bet it was. It's already scary taking a newborn home, and then to have that, to really need a nursing degree to try to take care of him or her. So, okay, another question from Barbara Olson. She asked about health literacy. Are there resources that the panel members could recommend to help parents with varying levels of health literacy be able to advocate for safe medication use in the hospital and use medication safely at home?
So I'd like to try to address that.
Sure.
So going back to technology, so our goal of the barcode is a knowledge access point. So the knowledge access point can go to the pharmacist or tech mixing. It can go to the nurse at the bedside that wants to know clinical stuff. But also the public could read a 2D barcode. And if they go into a mobile, you have multimedia. We're not restricted by the little tiny piece of paper in the handout. So imagine I go to McNeil to the drugstore, I want to get Tylenol. I capture it on my phone. It tells me how to give it. It shows me how a nurse squirts it in the mouth. It tells me the side effects. You're in the hospital and you have a downstream barcode on the med, which the nurse can read to adjust the pump, but so could the patient. So I'm a believer in knowledge. In other words, getting the correct knowledge at the right point. So I think that that's another thing we need to do to empower the public, is to have them have their own source of knowledge and compare it to what's going on.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those questions, and I just have a couple of last remarks. When I reflect on the experience that I have the privilege of doing, which is leading the Solutions for Patient Safety, sometimes people ask, and I ask myself, what is the one key to success? What do you observe in individual hospitals and kind of at a network level? And actually, it's not that hard to figure out. It's leadership engagement. It's not, it's not the bundles and the apps. Those things are critical. They're absolutely necessary, but they're insufficient. If there's not a leader that is willing to drive that into the medication delivery system, then they're not worth the paper that they're written on. So what does leadership engagement look like? I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of William Kahn. He's at Boston University, and for the last couple of decades, he's been pondering the meaning of engagement in your professional work, personal engagement in your professional work. And he has a model that I think is useful in thinking about healthcare leadership. He talks about engagement of the head, the heart, and the hands. So the head is understanding what the problem is. You need to have enough details to appreciate the complexity of the situation and understanding some of the solutions and opportunities as well. But then also engagement with your heart, so that when you see a video like the one of Josh or hear the story of Emily, or think about what the right thing is to do, you can let that drive you and you can inspire other people to do it as well. And then also engagement with your hands. It's not about writing a check or delivering an eloquent speech. It's about doing something, being a part of the solution actively. So, I think about medication errors have been happening for decades, and they happened 20 years ago, and they were darling little children then, and it was a tragedy. But the difference between then and now is we have solutions now. So at what point does it become a moral obligation of us, because we're the right people, to make sure that something like this never happens to a child again? I, for one, am ready to put this to bed and move on to a new problem. And I really look forward to that day and the partnership of these guys and all of you with me in doing that. Thanks a lot.